Okay, so welcome back to the Real English Party Online Tuesday afternoon book club. It looks like we are still having problems with doing the live stream. Apparently, my live stream software is not compatible with YouTube, which is strange because I'm using Google Meet, and of course, YouTube is owned by Google, I believe, which is so, or at least they're both owned by the same parent company. So you would think that the software would be compatible, but for some reason, and so suddenly over the last 2 or 3 weeks, it appears that I'm not able to live stream my Google Meet. So instead, what I've decided to do, because I've had to cancel last week's lesson, and the week before it didn't record. So I've decided to just do this as a recording, and I'll be posting this on the website after it's done. So you will be able to view this as it's uploaded to YouTube, and then the link is posted. So my apologies again for not being able to live stream this. It's probably better to record it anyway because I wasn't getting too many comments on the live stream. And to be quite honest, I think it's really something I'm doing by myself. So there's no reason to really bring anyone in unless they want to join the group, in which case we won't be recording or going live. So it's fine to do it this way, I suppose. So where were we? We're reading the book of Fairy Tale by Stephen King. It's been so long. It's been like 2 weeks now, so I don't even remember where we were last. But you weren't able to see the last reading. But in the last reading, basically, of our hero, Charlie, is he is helping Mr. Bowditch by taking care of his dog, and he also wants to do repairs around his house because he's become quite fond of Mr. Bowditch, who, as you recall, is in the hospital because he had a bad fall, and he's in bad shape right now, so he has to be in the hospital. Mr. Bowditch has named Charlie as sort of his, I guess you could say, his contact in case of emergency at the hospital. So the hospital has called Charlie about about something, and Charlie has asked his father to bring him to the hospital and go with him to the hospital so he could discuss whatever it is that the hospital wants to take up with him, since he is of record Mr. Bowditch's, I guess, his point of his contact, his familial contact. He doesn't have any family, he has no friends, so Charlie is the one. Meanwhile, also, Charlie has taken a picture for a local newspaper, and they wrote an article about how Charlie had saved Mr. Bowditch. And apparently that article has gone viral. Viral means on the internet. It really hasn't gone viral in that sense. It's actually just been sort of uplined to the Associated Press, which means that it's basically been sent from the local newspaper to a more national organization that kind of coordinates all of the newspapers. And so therefore his article ended up being published nationwide, so he's become something of a well-known person of the time in the country, or at least in that part of the country. So that's where we are now. And I guess as we start off now, Charlie's father has brought Charlie to the hospital to see Mrs. Ravensburger, who is the nurse, or at least the caretaker at the hospital that he needs to have a meeting with. So that's where we start. Let us begin. We met in Ravensburger's office. With her was a young woman named Melissa Wilcox, tall and toned, her blonde hair worn in a stubby, no-nonsense ponytail. She was going to be Mr. Bowditch's physical therapist. She did most of the talking, checking a little notebook from time to time so as to not forget anything. She said that after some discussion, Mr. Bowditch had agreed to allow her into his home twice a week to work on his range of motion and get him on his feet again. First with Canadian crutches, the kind with metal circlets for arm support, then with a walker. She would also take his vitals to make sure he was progressing nicely and check on something called pin care, which you will have to do, Charlie. I asked her what that meant, and she explained that rods going into his leg had to be swabbed regularly with disinfectant. She said it was a painful procedure, but not as painful as an infection that could lead to gangrene. I wanted to come 4 days a week, but he wouldn't have it, Melissa said. He's very clear on what he will and won't have. Tell me about it, I thought. He'll need a lot of help at first, Charlie, and he says you'll give it. According to him, Mrs. Ravensburger put in, you're his recovery plan. She was talking to me, but looking at my dad, as if inviting him to object. He didn't. Melissa flipped to a new page on her notebook, which was bright purple with a snarling tiger on front. He says that there's a bathroom on the first floor. Yes, I didn't bother telling her it was really small. She'd find that out on her first home visit. She nodded. That's a big deal, because he won't be capable of climbing stairs for some time. But he will be able to eventually. Okay. If he works hard, sure. He's elderly. Claims he doesn't know exactly how old he is, as a matter of fact. But he's in good shape. Doesn't smoke, says he doesn't drink, isn't carrying any extra weight. That's a biggie, Dad said. You bet it is. Weight bearing is a huge concern, especially in the elderly. The plan is for him to leave the hospital on Monday. There have to be safety bars installed on the sides of the toilet before then. Can you do that this weekend? If not, we'll push his release back to Tuesday. I can do it. I saw more YouTube. Hold on. Yeah, Google's giving me big problems. I can do it. I saw more YouTube videos in my immediate future. He'll need a urinal for nights and a bedpan for emergencies. You okay with that? I said yes, and I was. I had cleaned up vomit on more than one occasion. Dumping poo from a bedpan into a toilet might actually be a step up. Melissa closed her notebook. There are 1,000 other things, little things, most of them. This will help. Check it out. She took a pamphlet from the back pocket of her jeans. The title wasn't Home Care for Dummies, but it could have been. I said I'd read it and put it in my back pocket. I'll know better what's needed when I see the place for myself, Melissa said. I thought of taking a run up there this afternoon, but he's very insistent that I not go inside until he's back. Yes, Mr. Bowditch could be very insistent. I had discovered that early. Are you sure you want to take this on, Charlie? Mrs. Ravensburger asked. This time, she didn't face check my father first. Yes. Even if it means staying with him the first 3 or 4 nights, Melissa asked. I tried to discuss the possibility of rehab unit. There's a nice one called Riverview that has vacancies, but he wouldn't hear of it. He wanted to go home. Okay, and we're going to stop there for a moment. Go back to these first 2 pages. I think of on that first page, we did see the word gangrene, and I wanted to make sure you understood what that means. When she said it was a painful procedure, but not as painful as an infection that could lead to gangrene. Gangrene is a condition where your body becomes so infected and it becomes so, a part of your body becomes so affected and so rotten, in fact, that it needs to be amputated. It can't be recovered. So that's gangrene. It usually does actually, the body actually starts to discolor. It becomes numb. It's almost like getting frostbite, like it'd be frozen. And so they can't recover it at that point. Then they have to cut it off. So she wants to make sure that he keeps the pins or rods in his legs disinfected. So that's what she was talking about there with gangrene, if you didn't know. Not too much else there. You might notice he said she took a pamphlet from the back pocket of her jeans. The title wasn't Home Care for Dummies. Okay, so now there is a popular series of books called Anything for Dummies. And what they do is they teach anything. And whatever subject it is that it's teaching, it would say for dummies, because a dummy is someone who's not smart. So what it basically means is it teaches something in a very easy way. So even people who are not smart could understand. So home care for dummies, as it's listed on this page, really just means he's actually referencing a book that would teach something for someone in a very simple way. So it didn't say home care for dummies, but it could have been, which meant that it was a very simple manual and easy to understand. That's basically what he was saying there. That's what he's explaining. There's probably some more phrases you might want to know about, but since you're not here, let's move on. I can stay with him. Although the thought of maybe sleeping upstairs in a bedroom I'd so far not even seen was weird. No problem. It's school vacation. Mrs. Ravensburger turned to my dad. Are you all right with this arrangement, Mr. Reed? I waited, not sure what he'd say, but he came through. A little worried about it, which is probably natural, but Charlie's responsible. Mr. Bowditch seems to have formed a bond with him, and he really has no one else. I said, Miss Wilcox, about the house. She smiled. Melissa, please. We're going to be colleagues after all. It was easier to call her Melissa than it was to call Mr. Bowditch Howard, because she was closer to my age. About the house, don't take it personally, like he's afraid you're going to steal stuff or something. He's just, well, I didn't quite know how to finish, but Dad did. He's a private person. That's right, I said. And you have to make allowances for him being a little grouchy too, because Melissa didn't wait for the because. Believe me, if I had an external fixator holding my broken leg together, I'd be grouchy too. What's his insurance situation? Dad asked Mrs. Ravensburger. Can you say? Mrs. Ravensburger and Melissa Wilcox exchanged a glance. Mrs. Ravensburger said, I'm not comfortable going into detail about a patient's financial arrangements, but I will say that according to the bursar, he intends to take care of his expenses personally. Ah, Dad said, as if that explained everything. His face said it explained nothing. He got up and shook hands with Mrs. Ravensburger. So did I. Melissa followed us out into the hall, seeming to glide in her blinding white sneakers. LSU? I asked. She looked surprised. How'd you know? The notebook. Basketball? And we'll continue on from there. She smiled. And volleyball. Given her height, I bet she had a hell of a smash. Okay, so now we see that he's made an arrangement with the therapist, and the therapist is going to come to Mr. Bowditch's house after Mr. Bowditch returns from the hospital, and she's going to give him therapy twice a week. Charlie has agreed to help him every other day and even stay with him for the first few nights so he can get adjusted to his new situation. Charlie has also agreed to install some bars on the toilet so that he will be able to support himself stably as he sits down and stands up. So there weren't too many other phrases there that I can explain. So I guess that brings us to the end of that chapter. Let's move on to the next one. We're up to chapter 5. Shopping, my father's pipe, a call from Mr. Bowditch, the flower canister. Okay, and then we can see a picture of, I guess that's Radar, the dog, and of course, a pipe. That's his father's pipe, I'm assuming. So let's continue on. We went to the hardware store to get a safety bar installation kit, then to Pet Pantry. where there was also a walk-in veterinary. I got heartworm chewables and carprofen for Radar's arthritis. That stuff is supposed to be by prescription only, but when I explained the situation, the lady gave it to me, only specifying that meds had to be a cash deal. She said Mr. Bowditch bought all of Radar's stuff there, paying extra for delivery. Dad used his credit card for the safety bar kit. I used my own money for the pills. Our last stop was the drugstore, where I brought a urinal with a long neck, a bedpan, the disinfectant I was supposed to use for the pen care, and 2 spray bottles of heavy-duty window cleanser. I paid for that stuff too, but not cash. I had a $250 limit on my Visa, but wasn't worried the card would be refused. I was never what you'd call a shop till you drop type. On the ride home, I kept expecting Dad to talk to me about this commitment I'd made, which was, after all, pretty big for a kid of 17. He didn't, though. Just listened to classical music on the radio and sometimes sang along. I found out soon enough that he was just deciding what he wanted to say. I walked up to Mr. Bowditch's house, where I was greeted by Radar. I put her meds on the counter, then peeked in the bathroom. I thought the tight quarters would actually be helpful when it came to installing the safety bars and for him using them. But that was tomorrow's job. I'd seen a pile of clean rags on the shelf over the washing machine in the cellar. I went down and grabbed a double handful. It was a pretty spring day, and my initial idea had been to spend it outdoors, putting the fence to rights. But I decided that the windows should come first. So the stink of the cleanser would be out of the house when Mr. Bowditch came back. It also gave me an excuse to tour the place. In addition to the kitchen, pantry, and living room, the places where he actually lived, there was a dining room with a long table covered with a dust cloth. There were no chairs, which made it look pretty empty. There was also a room meant to be a study or a library or a combination of the two. I saw with real dismay that the ceiling had leaked and some of the books had gotten wet. These were very nice ones too, expensive looking and leather bound, not like the careless stacks in the back hall. There was a set of Dickens, a set of Kipling, a set of Mark Twain, and a set of someone named Thackeray. I decided that when I had more time, I'd pull them from the shelves, spread them on the floor, and see if they could be saved. There were probably YouTube videos about how to do that. I pretty much lived by YouTube that spring. There were 3 bedrooms on the second floor, plus the linen closet and another bigger bathroom. His bathroom was lined with more bookshelves, and there was a reading lamp on the side of the bed where he obviously slept. The books in here were the books in here were mostly paperbacks, mysteries, science fiction, fantasy, and pulp horror, going back to the 40s. Some looked really good, and I thought if things went okay, I'd ask to borrow some. I guessed Thackeray would be heavy going. But The Bride Wore Black looked right up my street. The bodacious bride on the cover was wearing black. Black, all right, but not much of it. There were 2 books on his bed table, a paperback called Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury, and a thick hardcover tome titled The Origins of Fantasy and Its Place in the World Matrix, Jungian Perspectives. On the cover was a funnel filling up with stars. One of the other bedrooms held a double bed that had been made up but was covered with a plastic sheet. The third was completely empty and smelled stale. If I'd been wearing hard shoes instead of sneaks, my footfalls would have made spooky hollow sounds in that one. Narrow stairs, psycho stairs, I thought, led up to the third floor. It wasn't an attic, but was being used as one. There was plenty of furniture jumbled up in the 3 rooms, including 6 fancy chairs that were probably supposed to go with the dining room table, and the bed from the empty room, with its head laid lengthwise across it. There were a couple of bikes, one missing a wheel, dusty cartons, old magazines, and in the third and smallest room, a wooden box of what looked like carpentry tools from the time when talking pictures were new. On the side, faded, were the initials AB. I picked out the drill, thinking it would help the safety bar installation, but it was frozen solid, and no wonder. The roof had leaked in the corner where the tools had been left, and the whole works, drill, 2 hammers, saw, a leveling gadget with a bleary yellow bubble in the middle, had gone to Rust City. Something needed to be done about the leaky roof, I thought, and before the next winter arrived, or there would be structural damage, if there hadn't been already. I started with the windows on the 3rd floor, because they were the dirtiest, filthy in fact. I could see I'd be changing the water in my bucket often, and of course, the insides were only half the job. I knocked off for lunch, heating a can of chili on the elderly hot point. Should I let you lick the bowl? I asked Radar. She looked up at me with those big brown eyes of hers. I won't tell if you won't. I put it down and she went at it. Then I went back to the windows. By the time I finished, it was mid-afternoon. My fingers looked pruny and my arms were tired from all the rubbing. But Windex and vinegar, as YouTube tipped, really did make a difference. The house was filled with light. I like it, I said. Want to take a stroll down to my house? See what Dad's up to? She barked. She barked that she did. Okay, so now Radar talking. Okay. So I want to go back to the page before because I wanted to point out some words here that could be useful. All right, so he did mention, he says, if we look at the last line on this page here, he says, I guessed that Thackeray would be heavy going. In this case, this phrase, be heavy going, I'm not familiar with it, but I've heard the word heavy lifting, and I think it's similar, in which case what it means is to be heavy going, I think, or to be heavy lifting, it would be difficult to do. To say that something is difficult to do would be to say that it is heavy going, or it is heavy lifting. Mm-hmm. But then he said, the bride wore black, looked right up my street. Okay, so now I've never heard this term exactly this way, right up my street, but I have heard the term right up my alley. And an alley is just a small, narrow street. Not really a street because it's not meant for cars to drive down. It's just the space between 2 buildings. But usually people can walk down an alley. But in any case, when we say it's right up my alley or right down my alley or right up my street, basically what we're saying is it means it's my kind, it's my type. It's something I would like, right? The bride wore black, looked right up my street, means like the bride wore black, looked like something I would like to read. Mm-hmm. And then the next word he uses is, he says, the bodacious bride. Okay, so now in this case, can you guess what the word bodacious means? Okay, I hope my hands are not giving too much of a hint, right? It's not by intention, but actually they happen to be in a great position to describe bodacious. Okay, bodacious means very, very attractive, usually because you have curves. And when I say you, I mean a woman. So it's not really attractive for a man to have curves so much, but for a woman to have curves, meaning that she has very prominent breasts, maybe large size breasts, maybe a thin waist, but maybe broad hips, which gives her an hourglass figure. We would call this kind of person, this kind of woman, bodacious. It's attractive, but in a way that is very physical. and because she has ample physical features. So that's the word bodacious. If you couldn't guess, if you had just guessed, oh, it's something good, you'd be right. Bodacious in this case is a good thing. Usually it's a good thing. Unless that bodacious women are not up your street. Some people don't like bodacious women. In fact, here where I am in Japan, I would imagine being bodacious is not the best thing to be. Women want to be as rail thin as possible, like supermodels, yeah? So there you have it. There were some other words and phrases that I could go over with you from what we've just read, but let's not waste too much time, yeah? It's been 2 weeks since we've really gotten anything read. I want to be able to get through a little bit more of this than usual. So basically, I'm just going to keep going on reading and then stopping when I think there's something that would be good and useful to explain. So we're moving on to part 2. Dad was waiting for me on the front porch. His pipe was on the rail, along with a pouch of tobacco, which meant we would be having the talk after all, a serious one. There was a time when my dad smoked cigarettes. I don't remember how old I was when Mom gave him the pipe for his birthday. It wasn't a fancy Sherlock Holmes job, but I think expensive. I do remember she'd been asking him to quit the cancer sticks, and he kept promising, vaguely, the way addicts do, that he would get around to it. The pipe did the trick. First, he cut down on the butts, then let them go entirely, not long before Mom crossed the goddamn bridge to get us a box of chicken. I liked the smell of the 3 sales he got at the tobacconist downtown, but quite often there was nothing to smell because it kept going out. That might have been part of Mom's master plan. But I never got a chance to ask her. Eventually, the pipe went into the pipe rack on the mantle, at least until Mom died. Then it came out again. I never saw him with another cigarette during his drinking years, but the pipe was always with him at night while he watched those old movies. Although he rarely lit it or even filled the bowl, he chewed the hell out of the stem and the bill. No, he chewed hell out of the stem and the bit. No, and he had to replace both. He took the pipe with him to AA meetings when he started going. There was no smoking there, so he chewed on the stem. Sometimes, Lindy Franklin told me this, with the bowl upside down. Okay, so let's just stop to make sure we understand what he's talking about here. There might be words that we don't use very often. So here we are seeing, he's using words relating to a pipe, right? He's describing a pipe. Now, when you have a pipe, the part that you put the tobacco in, that's called a bowl. Okay, so we're talking about a smoking pipe. So you smoke tobacco in the pipe. You put the tobacco in a bowl, and you put the stem in your mouth. But now the stem is just the part, it's not the part that goes in your mouth. The part that goes in your mouth is called the bit. And the stem connects the bit to the bowl of the pipe, right? So he would be biting on the stem and on the bit instead of actually smoking. And of course, he was told by a mutual friend that sometimes he would be biting on his pipe with the bowl upside down. So clearly there's no tobacco in it, and the tobacco wasn't important anymore. He just liked to have the pipe bit in his mouth, right? So that's what he's describing there. Let's move on. Around the time of his 2nd anniversary, the pipe went back into the rack on the mantle. I asked him about it once, and he said, "I'm 2 years sober. I think it's time I stopped teasing." But the pipe still came out once in a while, before some of the big agent meetings at the Chicago office if he had to make a presentation, always on the anniversary of Mom's death. And it was out now, complete with tobacco, which meant this was going to be a very serious talk. Radar climbed to the porch old lady style, pausing to inspect each step. When she finally made it, Dad scratched behind her ears. "Who's a good girl?" Radar made a woofing noise and lay down beside Dad's rocker. I took the other one. Did you get her started on the meds?" "Not yet. I'll sneak the heartworm and arthritis pill into her supper." You didn't take the safety bar installation. You didn't take the safety bar installation kit." "Well, that's for tomorrow. I'll read the instruction tonight. Also, the Home Care for Dummies pamphlet. I'll need to borrow your drill if it's okay. I found someone's toolbox, initials AB on it. Maybe his father's or grandfather's, but everything in it's rusty. The roof leaks." "Well, you're welcome to use it." He reached for the pipe. The bowl was already loaded. He had some kitchen matches in his breast pocket, and he scratched one alight with his thumbnail, a skill that had fascinated me as a little kid. Still did, actually. "You know, I'd be happy to go up there with you and help out." "No, that's okay. It's a pretty small bathroom, and we just get in each other's way." But that's not really it, is it, Chip? How long had it been since he'd called me that? 5 years? He held that lit match, already halfway down the stick, over the bowl and began sucking away. Also, waiting for me to reply, of course. But I had nothing. Radar raised her head, smelled the fragrant tobacco smoke, then put her snout back on the porch boards. She looked pretty contented. He took out the match. "There's nothing up there you don't want me to see, is there?" That made me think of Andy asking if there were a lot of stuffed animals and a sneaky Kit Kat clock that followed you with its eyes. I smiled. "No, it's just a house, kind of run down with a leaky roof. Something will have to be done about that eventually." He nodded and puffed his pipe. "I talked to Lindy about this situation." I wasn't surprised. Lindy was his sponsor, and Dad was supposed to talk about the things that bothered him. "He says that maybe you have a caretaker mentality from when I was boozing. God knows there were times when you did caretake me, young as you were. Cleaned the house, did the dishes, got your own breakfast, and sometimes your dinner." He paused. Those days were hard for me to remember and even harder to talk about. "It's not that." "Then what is it?" I still didn't want to tell him I'd made a deal with God and had to keep up my end of the bargain, but there was something else I could tell him, something he'd understand, and fortunately, it was true. "You know how they talk in AA about maintaining an attitude of gratitude?" He nodded. "A grateful alcoholic doesn't get drunk. That's what they say. And I'm grateful you don't drink anymore. Maybe I don't tell you all the time, but I am. So why don't let me try? Okay. So why don't we say I'm trying to pay it forward and leave it at that?" He took his pipe from his mouth and swiped a hand across his eyes. "All right, we will. But I want to meet him eventually. I feel like it's my duty. Do you understand that?" I said I did. "Maybe when he's a little bit down the road from the accident." He nodded. "That works. I love you, kiddo. Love you too." Okay, so let's see. Let's see. Did we have any words or phrases so far that should be explained? I'm sure there were, but I got a bit into the story. Let's discuss what happened here. I guess basically, at the hospital, Dad didn't seem to mind that his son was taking on all of these responsibilities at such a young age, but at home, it seems his father is concerned that maybe he's doing this out of a habit of taking care of of people, as he had to take care of his father at such a young age. Now, the boy didn't want to tell his father that he actually did this. He wants to do this because he feels like he owes God for helping his father stop drinking. But he was able to share partially that he was just grateful that his father stopped drinking, and so he wanted to do something to express his gratitude. And that's where we see this phrase, an attitude of gratitude, right? In the AA, Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, they say you should have an attitude of gratitude. And so then, of course, Charlie is grateful. Of course, but his father is just a little concerned. But they do end with a quick "I love you," and then they're able to move on. Not too much else I think I should explain there, but if you have any questions about this, then feel free to join the book club, and then we can discuss it. Also, you can leave comments on this webpage, and we can discuss that further. Okay, let's get to the end of this part of the chapter. Continuing. As long as you understand, you're biting off a lot. You know that, right? I did. And I was aware I didn't know just how much. I thought that was good. If I really knew, I might lose heart. There's that other thing they say in your program about taking it a day at a time. He nodded. Okay, but spring vacation will be over fast. You have to keep up with your studies no matter how much time you feel you have to spend up there. I insist on that. Okay. He looked at the pipe. This thing's gone out. It always does. He put it on the porch rail, then leaned down and scratched the thick fur on the nape of Radar's neck. She raised her head, then lowered it again. It's a damn good dog. Oh, I'm sorry. He said, this is a damn good dog. She is. Fell in love with her, didn't you? Well, yeah, I guess so. She's got a collar, but no tag, which means Mr. Bowditch hasn't paid the dog tax. My guess is she's never been to the vet. Mine too. Never been vaccinated for rabies, among other things. He paused, then said, got a question. I want you to think about it very seriously. Are we going to end up on the hook for this? The groceries, the dog meds, the safety bars? Don't forget the urinal, I said. Are we? Tell me what you think. He told me to keep track, and he'd take care of the expenses. This was half an answer at best. I knew it, and Dad probably did too. On second thought, strike the probably. Not that we're exactly in a hole on his account. A couple of $100 is all. But the hospital, do you know how much a week's stay in Arcadia costs? Plus the operations, of course, and all the aftercare. I didn't. But as an insurance adjuster, my dad did. $80,000 minimum. There's no way he could be on the hook for that. Oh, one more time. So there's no way we could be on the hook for that, could we? Okay, so let's look at this phrase, on the hook. There's a few more phrases here I'd like to discuss, but most importantly, let's look at this phrase, on the hook. The father asks, do you think we could be on the hook for this? So now that phrase, when we say on the hook for something, basically that means, do you think that we might be responsible for doing something? If you're on the hook, it means you're responsible for something. In this case, responsible for paying for it. You see, they've already paid for many of these things, but Mr. Bowditch will pay it back, they hope. And so if Mr. Bowditch pays them back, then they're not on the hook for those expenses. So that's what they're talking about. Do you think we could be on the hook for this? So they use this phrase, on the hook, and then he also uses this phrase, in a hole, right? He says, we're not exactly in a hole on his account. Okay. In a hole in this case, it means of having not enough money to survive, right? That could be in a hole. You don't have enough money to survive, or you have just enough money to survive, but you really, really need more money. You are in a hole. So basically what they're saying is they're not going bankrupt. They're not poor because of this. They can afford it, so far. It hasn't been that expensive. But then when they went on to talk about the hospital, that looks like it's going to be very expensive. And certainly they don't want to be on the hook for the hospital expense. And then also earlier on the page, he said, as long as you understand you're biting off a lot. Biting off a lot. Were you able to guess what that means? And he says, okay, it's okay for you to take care of Mr. Bowditch as long as you understand you're biting off a lot. So that's a hard one to guess, but maybe you might have guessed that it means to take on a responsibility. To bite off a lot is to take on a responsibility or to try to do something. A lot means to try to do a lot, or maybe too much. We have a saying for when you take on too much responsibility or you try to do too much. We say you bite off more than you can chew, right? And that's where this phrase comes from, biting off a lot, right? It's saying you might be biting off more than you can chew. So those phrases, I wanted to make sure you could understand those before we moved on to the end of this part. Okay, but now we've got that, so now let's continue on. No, that's all him. I don't know what kind of insurance he has, or if he has any. I checked with Lindy, and he has nothing with Overland. Medicare, probably. Beyond that, who knows? He shifted in his seat. I checked him out a little bit. I hope that doesn't make you mad. It didn't, and didn't surprise me because checking people out was what my father did for a living, and I was curious, of course. What did you find? Almost nothing, which I would have said was impossible in this day and age. Well, he doesn't have a computer or even a cell phone, which lets out Facebook and any other social media. I had an idea that Mr. Bowditch would have sneered at Facebook even if he had a computer. Facebook was Snoopy. You said there were initials on the toolbox you found. AB, right? Right. That fits. The property at the top of the hill comprises 1.5 acres, which is a hell of a good patch. It was purchased by someone named Adrian Bowditch in 1920. His grandfather? Maybe. But given how old he is, it could have been his father. Dad plucked his pipe off the porch rail, gave the bit a chew or two, then put it back. How old is he, anyway? Does he really not know? I wonder. I guess it's possible. When I saw him back in the old days, this was before he more or less hold up, he looked about 50. I'd give him a wave, and sometimes he'd flap a hand back to me. Never spoke to him? Might have said hi, I guess, or passed a word about the weather if it was worth commenting on, but he wasn't the conversational type. Anyway, that would have made him roughly the right age for Vietnam, but I couldn't find any military record. So he didn't serve. Probably didn't serve. I probably could have found out more if I was still working for Overland, but I'm not, and I didn't want to ask Lindy. I get it. I established that he's got at least some money because property taxes are a matter of public record, and the tab on number 1 Sycamore in 2012 was $22,000 and change. He pays that every year. It varies. Oh no. Okay, so Charlie asks, he pays that every year? Father answers, it varies. The important part is he's paying it, and he was here when your mom and I moved in. Maybe I told you that. he would have been shelling out a lot less back in the day. Property taxes have gone up like everything else, but you're still talking six figures in all. It's a big lot. What did he do before he retired? I don't know. I really just met the guy, and he was messed up when I did. We haven't had what you'd call a real heart-to-heart, although that was coming. I just didn't know it yet. I don't know either. I looked but didn't find. Which, it bears repeating, I would have said was impossible in this day and age. I've heard of people going off the grid, but usually in the wilds of Alaska with a cult that thinks the world's going to end, or in Montana with the Unabomber. Who? A domestic terrorist. Real name Ted Kaczynski. You didn't happen to see any bomb-making equipment lying around Bowditch's house, did you? Dad said this with a humorous lift of his eyebrows, but I wasn't entirely sure he was joking. The most dangerous thing I've seen was the scythe. Oh, and a rusty hatchet in that toolbox on the third floor. Any pictures? Like of his father and mother, or him when he was young? Nope. The only one I saw was a photo of Radar. It's on the table beside his easy chair in the living room. Huh? Dad reached for his pipe, changed his mind. We don't know where his money comes from, assuming he still has some, and we don't know what he did for a living. Okay, let's look at some phrases that we came across on this page, right? Okay, so now, he said here, if you look at this phrase right here, it says, the father says, you're still talking six figures. Okay, you see that there? So the whole sentence reads, he would be shelling out a lot less back in the day, property taxes. First of all, shelling out means paying. In this case, it's a slang term for paying, right? He would have been shelling out a lot less back in the day. Back in the days in the distant past. Property taxes have gone up like everything else. That means the taxes have increased. But then he says, but you're still talking six figures. Okay, so now when we use this phrase, you're still talking, actually what we're saying is we're making an estimation. So that you is not Charlie who he's talking to. When he says you're still talking six figures, what he's basically saying is we still can estimate about six figures. And what does six figures mean? Well, six figures literally means six-digit numbers, right? So if you can think, one is a one-digit number, 10 is a two-digit number, 100 is a three-digit number, so that's three figures. So four figures, 1,000. Five figures, 10,000. Six figures, 100,000. So when he says you're still talking six figures, what that basically means is he's still paying. We can still estimate that he pays somewhere in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, which is a lot of money for a house at that time, right? So it's a very expensive property, and so he must have some money, is what they were deciding. And then he said, I've heard of people going off the grid. Going off the grid. So what does that mean? Going off the grid. Yeah, so again, that's a phrase I don't think you could guess the meaning of. But okay, in this case, the grid really, actually, that usually means the power grid. It's the network of cables that give power to your house. But really, it stands for not just the power grid or just the power that comes to your house, but the infrastructure of society. So everything that connects us in society is also the way that society knows who you are, right? For example, you receive electricity at your house, you receive a bill. That electricity company knows who you are, they know your name, they know your address, they have your information. So you are on the grid means that companies have your information, and most importantly, the government has your information. So we can find out details about you if you're on the grid, right? Because you're connected with society in some kind of way. If you have a bank account, for example, the bank knows about you. And if the government needed information, they could ask the bank about you, right? If you're off the grid, basically what that means is there's no one who knows anything about you, and there's no way to find out about you because you have no official ties with anyone in society. That is being off the grid. So he said, I've heard of people going off the grid, but usually in the wilds of Alaska, right? So going out into the wild, into the wilderness of Alaska, or, or going to some place like Montana. I guess they're assuming Montana's the countryside, like the Unabomber, where the Unabomber was a famous terrorist came from. Mm-hmm. So those are some phrases I thought it might be helpful for you to know, and probably try to use them if you can in the future, right? But let's move on, see if we can get to the end of this part of the chapter. What happened here? Okay, yeah, I tell you, my tablet is not doing well. We will get better. We'll do better as we make more money here at the Real English Party. But for now, we're making do. All right, so let's continue on. Oh wait, well, you know what? Let's remind ourselves of the last thing that we said, because this page kind of spills over. So we're going to start with the last paragraph of the last page. So Dad says, Dad reached for his pipe, changed his mind. We don't know where his money comes from, assuming he still has some. And we don't know what he did for a living. Something from home, I assume, because he's an agoraphobe, that means. That means, I know what it means. My guess is he always tended in that direction, and it got worse as he got older. He pulled in. The lady across the street told me he used to walk radar at night. She pricked up her ears at the sound of her name. It seemed a little weird to me. Most people walk their dogs in the daytime, but less people on the streets at night, Dad said. Yeah, he sure doesn't seem like a hire neighbor kind of a guy. One other thing, Dad said, kind of weird. But he's kind of weird, wouldn't you say? I passed on the question and asked about the other thing. He's got a car. I don't know where it is, but he's got one. I found the registration online. It's a 1957 Studebaker. He gets a rate on the excise tax because it's registered as an antique, like the property tax. He pays the excise every year, but that's a lot cheaper, $60 or so. If he's got a car, you should be able to find his driver's license, Dad. That will say how old he is. He smiled and shook his head. Good try, but no Illinois license has ever been issued in the name of Howard Bowditch. And of course, you don't have to have a driver's license to buy a car. It might not even run. Why pay the yearly tax on a car that doesn't? Here's a better one, Chip. Why pay the tax when you can't drive? What about Adrian Bowditch, the father or grandfather? Maybe he had a license. Didn't think of that. I'll check. He paused. Are you sure you want to do this? I do. Then ask him about some of this stuff, because as far as I can find, he's almost not there. I said I would, and that seemed to close the discussion. I thought about mentioning the weird scuttering sound I'd heard in the shed with a heavy padlock on the door, even though there was supposedly nothing in it. But I didn't. That sound had grown vague in my mind, and I already had enough to think about. Okay, so now there's a lot there, I think, that we could have discussed if you were here. So there's plenty going on here that we probably would want to dig into. Yeah. But why don't we just, save that for if you should ever want to join this Real English Party group. I will try to arrange it so that we can live stream sometime in the future, but it does appear that that's not an option at present. Google is just not letting it happen. And I will work on fixing that. But in the meantime, you should be able to see, I guess, this event recorded shortly after it ends on the webpage for this event. And you can certainly leave comments there if you would like to, make a comment, ask a question, or, give a thumbs up. There's no really like and subscribe or anything like that. It's just a website. But certainly do exchange about this. Don't be a lurker. Don't be someone who just hides in the shadows. Your English will never improve by doing that. Feel free to engage about this story, or ask to join and become a member of the Real English Party in the future. Yeah. So we're going to stop there, and we'll pick up again. I guess there'll be another video posted about this time next week that you'll be able to watch in recorded form. You won't be able to send comments, but there weren't many comments to begin with, so that should be okay in real time at least. Who knows? I might, since I'm recording this now, I may be doing this at various times of the day and just uploading them on those Tuesday afternoons, because I am interested in this story myself, and so I would like to get through it a little faster than I have done, especially since we had the live streaming problem for the last 2 weeks. In any event, that is the close of today's book club. We're going to finish there. I look forward to seeing you next time. And in the meantime, please do not hesitate. Don't be shy. Don't be afraid. Get out there and join the Real English Party of life. Get better by doing it. You can never be perfectly prepared. You just have to start doing it, and doing it for real. And that's when you start getting better. All right? So I'll see you soon. Take care for now.